Pablo Guzman, Pablo Yoruba Guzman, Johanna Fernandez, Associate Professor of History at the City University of New York's Baruch College, also author of the award-winning book, The Young Lords of Radical History. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for Democracy Now!
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here, glad to have you along. Always wonderful on Tuesdays when I'm connecting with my audiences here on KFAI, as well as live streaming through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter, and through LinkedIn. However you're connecting with us, we value the relationship, the opportunity to be with you. It's important to us. And as such, we want to invite you to support The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You can do that by going to YouTube, Insight News MN, and subscribing. Be a subscriber, like, and share. Let your friends know that we do this every day, but the Tuesday is especially special because we're also live around the world on the mighty KFAI. Well, again, thank you. And today I want to do something different, two things different. One is read a piece that's going to be appearing in next week's edition of Insight News. We have a section in Insight News called Afrodescendientes, African descendants, descendants of Africa. And it's a section that's dedicated to exploring the idioms that we show up in the world. What do you mean, Al McFarlane? We produce one story in 7 different languages, obviously English, Spanish, then we also present the same story in Portuguese. We present it in Somali, we present it in Yoruba, and we present it in Swahili. Why? Well, I owe this to my own Afro-Cuban roots. Grew up studying Spanish, learning Spanish. I can't say that I'm particularly proficient, but I love the language, I love the feeling of Spanish, and I love the idea that I'm a Black man who speaks Spanish and for whom Spanish would have been my first language if I was born where my father was born in Cuba. My father immigrated from Cuba to Jamaica to here. I grew up feeling Cuban, feeling Afro-Latino, not knowing particularly why. I just knew that when my dad got mad and started cussing, he'd cuss in Spanish. And so I have a bit of the fire that comes from the Afro-Cuban passion and anger. And I treasure that, I value it. I parlayed that into the serious study of the language, both in high school and at university level. And so from time to time, I've been able to connect with people in community who are bilingual, multilingual. I also studied other languages. I studied briefly some French and some Chinese, had done some translation work in Portuguese for one of my professors at a university at Morehouse College. So I have this feeling of comfort around language, and I have an amazement. I'm amazed at the power of language, the beauty of language, the capability of language of connecting people and things and making order of existence. So I have a reverential attitude towards language itself. Well, to begin with, I want to start this program with a story, at least part of a story, that's going to appear in next week's edition of Afrodescendientes. And that article is written by Da Costa Uluremi, who's the national secretary of the Brazilian Descendants Association of Lagos. How do I get this? Well, through our colleague and Insight managing editor for Afrodescendientes, Yoji Senna, who joins us and he'll be with us today, as a matter of fact, from Bahia in Brazil. We've been able to create a connection with the Brazilian community of Lagos, Nigeria. And so I want to just read part of the article that will appear in the upcoming week's edition of Insight News in the Afrodescendientes section. Reading this in English, obviously, for you here on KFAI and on our streaming platforms, but when we present the article, you'll see the same article in English, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Swahili, in Yoruba, in Somali. I think that's it. I may have left one out, and in French. Those are languages we speak. There are more, but those are big languages. Well, he writes, it was the fragmentation of the ancient Oyo Empire due to intertribal wars that led to the enslavement of some Yorubas in Nigeria. Men, women, children, chiefs, and kings were taken as slaves to various parts of the Americas. 4.9 million slaves departed from Africa to Brazil between the 16th and 19th centuries. The Rio de Janeiro alone received over 2 million slaves, becoming a major point of entry for many slaves. The Bahia and other places were also points of entry where slaves were taken to Brazil. In 1807, the Nago revolt, Nago, N-A-G-O, revolt began in Bahia and continued to 1835. The Nago revolt was a protest by Yoruba slaves in Brazil to return to their homeland. However, many of them died during the struggle. The revolt was also known as the Male revolt, Male, M-A-L-E revolt, because of the connections some of the leaders had with Islam. Male is derived from Imale, the Yoruba word used to refer to a Muslim, and Nago is what the Yoruba slave was called in Brazil. The slave trade was abolished in Brazil on September 4th, 1850 by the Eusebio de Queiroz law, and finally slavery ended in 1888. Some of the slaves in Brazil bought their freedom before the end of the slave trade and returned to their homelands. However, the influx of emancipated Brazilians returning to Lagos began in 1854 and lasted several years. Some of the Yoruba slaves who remained in Brazil kept the Yoruba culture and tradition alive until today. Some of the Yoruba worship rituals they left behind are Sango, Osumare, Ogun, Sun, Osusi, Oya, Osanyan, Orisanla, Obatala, Obaluaye, Sopana. In Brazil today, they have the major religions of Candomblé and Umbanda. Well, I'll read a couple more paragraphs and then we'll go to our conversation today. Upon arriving in Lagos, the emancipated Brazilians found the Oba, the king of Lagos, and asked him for a place to settle. The Oba told them that the only available location was the eastern part of Lagos Island, which was a wild region and a dense forest. Upon arriving in the eastern part of Lagos Island, they set up a camp and built tents for themselves in the current Upper Campos Square. The community grew rapidly due to the skills and knowledge acquired in Brazil. They were construction experts, and there were many artisans among them. Their settlement is called Quartiero, Yoji will correct me on that, Brasileiro, Popo Aguda, or Popo Ma'aro. Ma'aro is derived from the Yoruba phrase Ma'a Ronin or Imi Aronin, meaning I will tell the story. According to the Lagos State Gazette, the community is a cultural heritage class 3 of Lagos State, and the boundaries, it lists them. Well, I'm going to stop there. It's a fascinating story. Read the story, read it in next week's edition of Insight News. And before going further, let me bring in Brother Yoji Senna, who's joining us from Bahia, and also Dr. Irma McFarlane, who I believe is joining us from either Alabama or North Carolina. Yoji, how you doing? Dr. Irma, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
I'm doing great.
Great. You know, that story I just am reading is fascinating. It's just a wonderful account of the transatlantic slave trade experience from within our culture. And it's one we don't get. So tell me about the connection, how you've established the relationship with the writer Yoji, and what we believe our intent and value will be for our community and for readers everywhere?
Well, I think it's important to know those stories, right? And our history or history, so we can better understand what's going on, and to know that's what's more have been reinforced lately to me, that even though that we are Black people, that we are born in different lands in the Americas, we are the same. We are part of a people that suffer forced immigration, and we do face similar perils in the present day. And if this awareness that we Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Colombians, Afro-Americans, Afro-Haitians, we all, even though that we speak now different languages, we share a lot of common traits, common cultural roots that would give us the ability to 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 change, if not the present, but the immediate future. Here in Brazil this week is funny, also not funny, perhaps not the best word, but the Banco do Brasil, which is the central bank of Brazil, apologized and acknowledged its role in the slavery, which is something very unusual, and it's a big precedent. I mean, actually offer apologies for it. And this week here in Brazil, it was created the Congressional Black Caucus for first time, with legislators from different parties, because in Brazil there is a plethora of political parties. But now they're going to be working together across political parties to establish a Black agenda. I think I have mentioned earlier during other shows that it's intense here, the reclaiming of the Black population in Brazil, and the government and the mainstream media. In many ways, it's embracing this push. So it's like everything trendy here now. It's black culture, it's Black festival, Black technology, all this kind of events going on. So there is, at least in Brazil, a transformation into the realization of here, when many times we compare with the United States, where we are much bigger numbers than the U.S. and majority in relationship between the American and the but our political power is exiguous. So right now exists this possibility with a concerted action that more benefits or more justice can be coming toward us. Still remembering that the rate of assassination of Black youth, be it involved or not with crime, is staggering. If it was in the United States, would be worldwide news. The rate, like think issues similar to George Floyd is almost daily here. The cases also of domestic slavery and rural slavery, it's still very, very common to happen. So we do have our problems, but we are in this moment that at least here the Black youth of Brazil are realizing there is other people like us, not only in the US but also in Africa, in the Caribbean, even East Africa. They're aware of this our pan presence, our pan-Africanism, right? So it's encouraging to see this here.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane, talking with my colleague Yoji Senna, who's joining us and regularly joins us from Bahia. He's the managing editor of the Afro-Descendientes Project for Insight News. Also, here's Dr. Irma McLaurin, who's Insight News' culture and education editor. Dr. Irma, my friend, how are you? Good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm in North Carolina right now.
Okay. Well, join this conversation first. I know you've got some other things that you wanted to bring forward, particularly about George Santos and the whole idea of performing memories, the archive work that you're doing, I believe. But
Well, let me start with
Sure.
Performing Memories. This is a book that I just got, and maybe I just sent the link. But basically, this person, Sanyan Day, I met him in South Africa. He was the director of the Diversity Institute at Wits University. And its significance is that he's tracing the African presence in India. Everybody wants to believe that, there's no African presence in India, but in Gujarat, he's traced it in terms of the music, the culture since the 15th century. And so I think what Yoji is saying to us is that, not only are we connected in the Americas, but it actually crosses other kinds of borders and geographies as well. And so Sanyan Day has spent a lot of energy capturing the music, looking at dance ways, and looking at the ways in which this elements of African heritage is still very much embedded and has been fused, as we see in the Americas as well, with other cultures, with the Southeast Asian culture. And so I think it's important, as he says, that we came from a continent, we took different ships to different destinations, but we're actually, very much connected. And I think the more that we recognize that, the more supportive we can be for us to support the kinds of struggles that are happening in Brazil and other places, Haiti, in the diaspora, and for them to support us. Yoji, I was there in Brazil last summer, and the ability to see the way in which African culture is very much embedded and infused and integrated. It's not just something you do on a side, right? And you have your everyday culture, and then, on the weekends or Kwanzaa, you kind of put on your Africanisms, but it is so much a vibrant part of the everyday structure. And
every day, all day long.
All day long. And so it's not something people do on occasion. They live it, they breathe it, they use it to inform. The women I spoke with, if people have read the stories, talk about how it's their orishas who are guiding them, whether it's for education, whether it's for developing institutes that celebrate the contributions of Black Brazilian women, whatever journey, hip hop, whatever journey they're on, they see the spirits of the orishas, the African orishas, as informing that and infusing that. And I think that's really important for us to understand, because we're at a moment of erasure in this country. There is a deliberate enterprise to try and sort of negate what little history we have managed to hold on to and create in this country. And so it's important that we sort of look at other places where people have been able to, utilize and build on that culture and stuff.
Yoji?
Yeah, it is. As she's saying, it's overwhelming. Sometimes I walk now, as I walk around, I don't have any I adapted in these last 3 years, and things are not as new as it is, but constantly what I notice is this constant presence of this Blackness, this Africanness, that it is in sometimes certain moments cliche because of tourism and stuff like that, but there is this matter of fact things it's done, you know, in an African way, you know, in this neo-African way here, you know,
It just
it's
happens.
very, huh?
It just happens, you know. It's just
Yes,
it's
yes.
just there.
It's
And I remember
it's
a
very
colleague from,
reassuring.
yes, and I remember a colleague from Cuba once talking about the fact, like we talk about going to dance salsa. He was like, Cubans just dance, you know, it's like part of the everyday life. It's not something you go to do at an event, but it's very much woven. People just break into dances and it's natural and it comes, you know, and we've kind of lost that spontaneity and that kind of way of fusing together, being dispersed in cities, disconnected from our culture. But I think when people go to Cuba, when they go to Brazil, when they go to Haiti as well, that you begin to see, you know, the way in which it's infused. It's not something you do on the side. It is part of your everyday living and breathing.
So, this conversation reminds me, I talked to one of our team members this morning about her holiday weekend in rural Georgia. She's from a place that her parents grew up in. They knew each other as children, married, and she grew up there. Her husband grew up there as well, knew each other as children. And it's a small town. She said maybe one stoplight or two in this southern town. And as she was describing her weekend to me, it reminded me of me visiting my wife Bobby's hometown in Crystal Springs, Mississippi. Crystal Springs, a small town about maybe 20 minutes south of Jackson on Highway 55. When I went there the first time, I just remember sitting on her grandmother's porch across from a field, and people would drive up and down the road, or even ride horses up and down the road, and you'd wave at them and they'd wave back. That was the culture. One time at another sister's house around the corner, there was a commotion in the chicken coop, which is across the street from her house, right? And that signified that a snake or something was in there. The cousin who lived next door from the grandma came out of the house with his shotgun, walked to the coop, blast, killed the snake, walked back out. It was like everyday activity, no big deal, but it was kind of a highlight for the visit for me. I told her that, being in Crystal Springs reminded me of being in Dressakey or Mile Gully, Jamaica. Mile Gully, Jamaica is where my father lived and where the McFarlanes were in the Blue Mountains in Jamaica. And I said that our people are the same everywhere. That's the point I'm making. And the same positions or the same activity or the same dynamics show up in interpersonal relationships between us and among us everywhere. And I discovered the truth of that when I visited both East Africa and West Africa, that in every instance, each place is interchangeable and each role is interchangeable. The people who are healers, the people who are educators, the people who are advancers of culture, the people who are crooks, all of them have to be present to create this dynamic, robust interchange of community and of humanity that we are. And I think all of the elements of what human beings can be are always present in every situation. And that's why your note about India resonates with me as well. I met some performers from a place called Sidi Goma, or they were called the Sidi Goma. These were Black
Yes,
African,
cities. Yes.
Yeah, black. They were from the community called Goma, the Sidis from Goma, and we had a history of themselves being in city since I think 1200, 1300, as you mentioned, and that again reveals and reflects our presence everywhere on the planet.
I think they have a copy of the cover of the book cover, because I think just to let people see it,
Yeah, bring it up.
and just to re-emphasize that it is such, we tend to not think about the African diaspora outside of the Americas or the continent of Africa,
Mhm.
in the Caribbean, but it stretches to, the Indian Ocean, and it's been there for a long time, and it's kind of been erased. And so Sanyan Day is someone who's been, collecting this information and documenting it, the music, the dance, the ways in which they've both integrated, just like Brazil has integrated, sort of elements of Portuguese culture, but also retained a lot of African culture. That's what he's documenting. And we have to start understanding that this erasure that they want to have, it's important for us to put a pause in it, to stop it, to fight against it, to resist. And as he says, it's about archiving. So it gets back to what I'm doing, and what I think is important is writing about it, archiving it. I mean, I think I took about 1,900 photographs when I was in Brazil, at least according to my camera. So I've got all of that documentation, the time we spent together, the people, the faces. And, that's going to be so important 50 years from now, and I think that's the work that you're doing, the translation of, our articles into multiple languages, is part of us weaving an archive, if you will, about the African descendants across, the world, not just across the Americas, but across the world. And might be interesting to have Sanyan Day on sometime.
Sure, sure. Well,
Yeah.
we did have Brother Olarimi on before. I think we did, and we're going to have him back again because he's going to be contributing regularly from Lagos. But so, do you take a minute to describe the work of the BDA, the Brazil Association of Lagos?
Me?
Yeah, please. Talk about
Yes.
that relationship and what their role is, and how that interplay is critical and important, and how it really is an unbroken link of engagement. We think of ourselves here in North America, Irma, as severed completely.
Yes.
That was their intent, and they almost succeeded. They did succeed in many ways. We're coming through that. But I think in Brazil, the narrative is different because there was an ongoing engagement and memory that was not destroyed that continues to flourish. Yoji, what do you think?
Yes. I don't know if you guys are aware what it's called the Malays revolt or the Malays revolt. Malays is how the Muslims, Yoruba Muslims, were called. Malay it's Muslim and Yoruba. So there was a revolt that actually this information that the information that we got here officially, that was a revolt in the year 1835 that was similar to the ideals of Nat Turner, that was to take over the city and kill all the white people and the Creoles, blacks. So Creole is a term that's applied to the people who were born in the Americas, be it black or white, be African or European, born in America, was called Creole. So, but this revolt started around the year 1808. So what it grew for years until it culminated to this one in 1835, that they got betrayal. So the plan was to take over the city and the state, kill the white dominant class and the Brazilian-born black people, and establish an Islamic state in Bahia. Right? And the Malays, particularly, they were very different because they were enslaved people. They were alphabetized. They knew how to write and read in Arabic. Therefore, they could communicate among themselves without the knowledge of other enslaved people of other tribes, and even from the white master, that most of them were also illiterate. So that is the frame of the story. So this revolt got broken down in 1845 because it was betrayed from inside, and they killed the principal leaders and they exiled many of them, and they sent them back to Africa. That created a movement of return. So a lot of people in that moment in Bahia, even so, there were already a middle class of black people, because during slavery in Brazil there were also free black people who, more in urban areas, have access to some sort of wealth. So those people moved back in mass to back to Africa. So starting in 1930s, there is this great movement of returning to Africa, where those who have skills from here, people that are builders, have wealth, have accumulated wealth, entire families move back to Nigeria, to Lagos. And then they started what today is known as Popo Aguda. Popo Aguda is the name that the Brazilian community have in Lagos, but also we have communities in Benin and also in Ghana. They are also called Aguda in Benin, and in Ghana they call Tabon. Tabon people as all good in Portuguese. So the BDA is the association of these descendants that they kept together since the 1830s as a distinctive trait of them being Afro-Brazilians, have returned to Africa with this Brazilian experience. Some of them has been ex-slaves, others have been freedmen. So in certain way, they are today, our organization with more than 100 years, established among the government of Nigeria. And they are doing this revival also of the pride of their origins. So to them, their origins is Brazil, and it's funny because it's like in certain ways here in Brazil, we did kept certain cultural expressions in some sort of time capsule. They did have it over there. So these people, even though what motivated was Islamic rebellion in Bahia, they were the introducers of Catholicism in Nigeria, as well the builders of the first mosques and Catholic churches.
Wow.
So, and they divide themselves there between part of those Popo Aguda people, Brazilian descendants. Some are Muslims, some are Catholics, not Christians. I mean, not evangelical, but Catholic. So they are the bastion of Catholicism in Lagos. So, and they are, in this drive to really reconnect with Brazil. With I am their representative now officially for Brazil, and I'm trying to help them navigate and create work here in Brazil. So they have interest and become a city, sister city with the city of Santo Amaro da Purificação, and they are planning establish contact with the Black carnival organizations here and some temples, because they are planning to come between 100 and 200 people to visit Bahia. And so they want to establish connection with federal government, state government, want to advocate to have access to have Brazilian nationality. So it is a very, I would say, powerful organization in Nigeria, right? They're offering Portuguese classes. They have invited me to come and establish some capoeira classes over there. So it is this B-Day Brazilian. Now, actually, this month also they have the Afro-Brazilian Heritage Festival. And it's very interesting to talk to them because they have a museum, so with artifacts that were brought back in the 1830s, and it's good to have a grasp in certain way of the reality of the life of our ancestors. And also it's something that touches me particularly because in my family history, my great-grandmother was one of those enslaved people that she was able to buy her freedom, and she would travel back and forth um, between Bahia and Nigeria. At that time, it was not Nigeria, but between Bahia and Lagos as a trader, right? Which a lot of Yoruba people are very good at as a trader, and that is the reason that I got accepted into the association. So I think I'm the first Brazilian-born member of the Brazilian Descendants Association
Wow.
in Lagos. I'm trying to do now this reconnection, right? Like Dr. Irma, she went with me to Casablanca, for example, right? Casablanca is the oldest temple in Bahia, in
Yes.
Brazil. It's the first temple in Brazil, and was started in 1820s, and moved to that location that we went
Mm-hmm.
in 1830s because of the Malays uh, revolt. Because in the 1830s, where you went, that location that you went was in the outskirts, very far from the city. So it
Yes.
was a rural area, even though today is downtown almost. So
Yeah.
was they were moved they were moved forcefully from the location where was right downtown. You know that that statue with that poet with the hand extended like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know
Right,
exactly.
right. So there was the temple was there was downtown Salvador. Now became a cultural center with and has the name Yanaso, which is the name the founder. So all
Mm-hmm.
this is related, you know. This BDA also, the Brazilian Descendants Association, they have a lot of connections with Cubans. So at the same time that Brazilians were returning to Nigeria, Cubans were also returning.
Mm.
Mm.
So, you know, there is this mix where Brazilians were more numerous and they predominate, but were also movement or returning of Cubans.
And
Let
I
me,
think it's important to understand then that the routes go in both directions, that we
mhm,
think of the diaspora as only coming from Africa and spreading out, but it's
mhm.
actually returning back to the continent as well. So you have
And
all
also
of that.
listen, and those routes were common at that time. The world you travel by ships, by boat, by sailing boats. Even wasn't even still steamboats that would change a lot
Mhm.
of the dynamics. So Salvador was one of the biggest city in the world at the time, because to go from Europe to India to Asia to Africa, you could not just come down from Europe and go down the coast of Africa, because you'd get stuck there, and it's called the Calmarias. So the part of the year there's no wind in the coast of Africa. So the only way was to triangulate, right? Triangulate into Brazil, Rio, or Salvador, and then shoot down to Africa or to Cape, South Africa, and then to India. So
Yes.
you know, so the connection also between or the some sort of proto globalization was common. So the connection between Salvador and Charlotte was common. The presence of Black Americans here was common. Being sailors, the form of commerce was through boats. The form of people traveling was through boats.
Let me
So
read a little bit more of
was
the article that Brother uh, uh,
Remy.
Olaribi wrote. This towards the end of it. He says the Association of Brazilian Descendants in Lagos is the guardian of the Brazilian Bumba Meu Boy. How do I say that properly, Yoji?
Bumba meu
Bumba
boi.
Meu Boy.
Meu
That was
boi.
close. Okay, in Nigeria, and the Brazilian Association of Campos Caretas, also La Fiage Fanti Association of the Brazilian Quarter, Popo Aguda, uh, 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 which are the coordinators of the Afro-Brazilian Heritage Carnival in Nigeria. He says that food is a universal language of culture for all humans, and that Aguda foods are an important element of the Afro-Brazilian heritage in Nigeria. Delights such as frejon, uh,
Feijão. Yeah,
Mingau.
they pronounce it different.
Okay. Mingau, canjica, arroz doce, feijoada, mocoto, moqueca, munzuka, sopa de mondongo, gari, farfofa, couscous. I kind of know what these are, coconut rice and snacks like guridi, chuk chuk, sweet coconut, and chin chin, and many others are what the Brazilian fraternities brought back to West Africa at the end of the slave trade. And it says the Brazilian Popo Aguda block is the only place in Nigeria where these foods are consumed daily. It's pertinent to state here, he says, that the basic diet of West Africa, gari, was developed by our captive ancestors in Brazil as a cheap and available source of mu inikun food, meaning fill the stomach, from South American tuber culture, the cassava, and introduced to West Africa. Coincidentally, he said, Nigeria is now the world's largest producer of cassava. The recipes for these delights could have disappeared if our ancestors had not ensured they transferred culinary skills and recipes from one generation to another. He goes on to talk about the music and the connection and the power of music. He closes his article by stating who he is. The article says this article was written by Da Costa Olureme, who's the managing director and CEO of Redact Tours. But he goes on to say, and I think this is just so cool, that he's the son of Mr. Oluwasegun Da Costa, grandson of Papa Luis Sani Ayodele Da Costa, and great-grandson of Papa Anthony Da Costa from Bambos Street 151, Lagos Island, who arrived in Lagos in the 19th century and is the descendant of Papa Abrio Martins, father of Lucretia Yetunde Greatwaite from Okesuna Street 94, Lagos Island. Oluremi is a journalist and tourism professional, currently the national secretary of the Brazilian Descendants Association of Lagos. I love the fact that he establishes his credentials and his authenticity and the genealogy of his presence right here, because that's something that I think, Irma, we struggle with here in North America, that we still, the work that's been done in your other home place in Alabama with Barracoon, right, is important work of reconnecting us in a first-hand experiential way to.
But I think it's important to understand that before Barracoon, there were Africans already in Mobile, enslaved people, and that the enterprise was to erase us. It was to put people who spoke multiple languages together so they could not communicate. They were forced to learn what we now call Ebonics or Creole English to create that, but also they were not recording births and deaths. So this paper trail that we become so dependent on, and if people can't necessarily communicate to retain that history, that lineage, and then we had people sold off, families broken up and sold in different places. So I will be going to Lower Peachtree, Alabama to see what I can find out about my mother's roots. And then also to Georgetown, Mississippi, which has all of 245 people in it as of today, to see if I can find out something about my father, and where this last name of McLaurin, which is then sometimes spelled McLaurin, which is a Scottish name. It means Lawrence, son of Lawrence. Mick just means son of, Lauren just means Lawrence. But to see, and I have people in South Carolina, one of my students, who they swear I look like their grandmother. And so they think that there may be some connection there. They just say I look like her so much. So, these are, it is wonderful when people can do that. And to me, rather than lament what I can't retrieve, I'd rather sort of look at what we did create. And for me to begin that enterprise of documenting and archiving what exists now, so that 100 years from now, we won't be having that same conversation about what was or what wasn't. And so the work that I'm doing in preserving the contributions of Black women here is to me absolutely a part of that, and critical photographs. And people keep coming up to me saying, I've been tracking my family and I have these documents. And the first thing I say to them is, what are you going to do with your stuff? What are you going to do with it? Once you've collected it, to generation, they're all into digital, this and that. So what are you going to do with the hard copies, the papers, the photographs that you have? And I think that's where my archive becomes really, really crucial.
You're looking for digital and hard copy?
Both, everything.
Both.
But the reason that we're still focused on the paper documents is that nobody knows what the lifespan of digital content is. Okay. So it changes so rapidly. Platforms come and go. I don't know how many people remember MySpace, but it was like the big thing where instead of, having a website, you had a MySpace, right? Instead of having a YouTube channel, right? And it disappeared, it may still be out there, but people who had stuff on it, it's gone now. And so the paper content, particularly if people have documents and photographs and things, they need to be preserved because they can disintegrate. They can get burned in fires. And so putting them in archives, libraries still want that real hard paper. And in the photographs, you have the digitized versions, but the negatives and the actual prints, what would we do if we didn't have Gordon Parks negatives? They weren't digital. If we didn't have, Vanderzee's photographs, it tells us a whole history of Black people in America. And what if those things had been lost? So that's what I'm into, is we will digitize and accept digital content, but we're also looking for, hard copies and papers and photographs and diaries and, all kinds, and artifacts. What are the things? Sometimes people have elements of things that tell a story about who the family, is. So all of it becomes part of the archive.
Let's put in the maybe in the chat how people can connect with you if they want to find out more, figure out how they can get their family and personal genealogical stories to the Irma McFarlane archive at University of Massachusetts Amherst. Also, let's pivot a little bit for the last few minutes here. I wanted to have you talk about the article that you want to share about George Santos.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, I'm just astounded. I think we've reached a new in American politics where you have someone like this. And if Cooper can put up the article. So this is how people can reach me, blackfeministarchive@gmail.com. Very simple. Or they can go to the UMass Library, Special Collections, and reach out to them. But this is the fastest way to reach me. But I was struck by this Santos article because he's now being accused of actually having, transgressed his relatives. I mean, when you turn on your own people, it's pretty bad. If you fleece strangers, it's one thing, but when you start fleecing and doing your own relatives, I mean, that's really low. That's as low as you can get. And yet nobody is talking about this person resigning. This man has been controversial since before he was installed, and it continues. And it seems as if he's taken the Donald Trump approach, is like, do whatever you want and see if they're bad enough to come after you, right? And even then you lie and you lie again. And so I'm just listening, I just happened to look at the headlines to say, okay, what's out there in the universe? And outside of, Israel and Hamas, which has occupied so much space, there was this article, new charges, identity theft, credit card fraud against his own relatives. This is somebody you do not want to invite to your house for Thanksgiving dinner or anything else. But I think for me,
and the worst thing is he's giving us a black eye because he's a Brazilian American.
Okay. There
and
you
he
go.
has a trail here too of bouncing shots. And he did an agreement with the Minister of Justice here recently too. He was prosecuted here because they found him after the scandal started popping up in the U.S. They found him, you know, because he would come here on vacation and you know, do a string of bouncing checks, yeah, and giving us Brazilian a bad name.
What is surprising to me is that I've worked for the federal government, and one of the things, if you I worked in the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, and I worked at the Federal Executive Institute, and I had to pass background check and security clearance. We didn't get clearance per se because we would have had to carry a firearm. But they do a thorough background check where they literally sit down with you and every single item that you put in your background. And that includes, do you know any people who are not citizens of the US who come from other countries? They want addresses. They go and talk to your neighbors. People have no idea of the kind of scrutiny you undergo. I've had orange level security and I've also been cleared, right? But you go through these enormous background checks. And the fact that this person was able to get through the vetting process of this political parties and nobody saw the flags until after he was installed is just astounding to me. But it says that American politics have reached a new low. And that low is the standard of a Donald Trump, where you can be a crook and people still want to elect you.
But in the US, you can run for office being in jail. So this is kind of doesn't match much, you know. As you say, you have scrutiny about everything, but certain things you pass through like a tube, you know.
Yes, yes. But I think it says to me, you know, at the time that I was working for the federal government, one's ethical positions, the way that, you know, you have to go through training of not to have conflicts of interest, so that if you go out to lunch with someone, you can't even take a $2 cup of coffee, you know, and you have to go through and make sure that you understand what are the restrictions. I worked at USAID and the Reagan building, had orange level security clearance. And, you know, we had to go through this training to say what is permissible and what is not. And literally the standard is anything that's over $2, you can't accept, you know, even, you know, so even if you're off duty, technically, you really can't accept that, because so you end up being the person say, hey, I'll buy lunch or I'll do this, as opposed to people doing it for you so that you don't get caught in that compromise. And now it seems as if ethics and ethical behavior has just gone, like, you know, it got thrown out with the bath water. Okay.
Our producer has highlighted the article that says Santos charged at least $44,800 to one unknowing donor's credit card, the indictment states. So, yeah, that's crazy. Egregious, I think is the right word for it.
Egregious,
so,
absolutely.
You know, I was talking to a workman a few days ago here, and he was a white guy who was saying, well, you know, policy is what matters. And who cares about what somebody did? Who cares about, you know, any kind of personal flaws they have? It's the policy. It's the policy.
And the question is, do you want someone who is so unethical to be
Right.
formulating policies for the entire country?
There
I mean,
you go.
but this is also about whiteness. You know, Yoji, he's Brazilian, but he's a white Brazilian. He doesn't present himself as Afro-Brazilian, at least not today. He may change to that down the road. But the
Jewish
point is, you know, but the point is that this is someone who, if people say, well, what matters are the policies, how can you trust the policies that someone is formulating when in their personal life and even in their public life, they are unethical, they lie, they cheat, they steal? And this is someone you want to set policy? What kind of policies are people looking for?
And this guy didn't care. It didn't matter. He said two concerns he had. One was policy, and the other one was sealing the borders, keeping out the people that are the problem. So,
Oh, you mean people like him? Because nobody sealed the, and this is where whiteness becomes,
and what he really
whether
knows,
one
people like
walks,
you.
right, well, whether one walks with whiteness, but the phenotype of whiteness has gotten him a pass. Had this man been Black or Latino visibly, they would have had him under the jail calling for his resignation. And yet they keep letting him just continue to open up this Pandora's box. And I hope it bites him in the butt.
But Jefferson,
do you guys see
Louisiana,
him
for
as
example.
white? Do you guys see him as white?
Yes. I mean, he is walking with whiteness. His politics are those of whiteness. He's not presented himself as of color.
I would see him. I mean, visually to me, him doesn't look like a white person. I would like for the United States, to me, he would look like a Latino or maybe Arabic.
But you have Blanquitos, you have white Latinos who also pass for white.
No, but
and it's walking. It's walking with whiteness so much. It's not so much the phenotype, but
he walks with the codes of whiteness. But what I'm saying, his appearance is a mix of Indian, native and Black, like very common here in Brazil. Isn't this racially ambiguous, as they call today, But I think it's more because of the policy and, to keep some kind of majority on Congress they are overseeing,
He has aligned himself with whiteness, and whether if they embrace him, it's not about phenotype, but it's about the ideology and the way in which one presents oneself. And he has clearly aligned himself with whiteness and the conservative white power structures, and they are protecting him. And I just find this so utterly amazing because it says, what then do we have to look forward next year in November? Because if this is the politics that people say it's okay as long as he has policy, right? If people say it's okay to be a liar, a cheat, a thief, and maintain office, then this country is definitely gone to hell in a handbasket.
Well, it means a person who is saying that is looking for his or her opportunity to join the looting of humanity, the looting of society, sees a society
of democracy,
of a system of looting that they really are comfortable with. They look in a bifurcated way. There's the espoused principles of democracy, but there's the reality beneath it that they operate within. And that reality is deny, destroy, steal, and act like it didn't happen, like it's normal. Right. So that's kind of what I see. Well, listen, Irma, any other thing you want to talk about? We got about a minute or two before we close.
Well, I don't know. How do you be hopeful in this kind of an environment? We have war, war going on. We have no idea what's going to happen, in Palestine, in the Gaza, all of these things that are upon us, and people are dying. I mean, whatever side you're on, the reality is that, innocent people are caught in the middle. There's an African proverb that says, when two elephants rumble, it's the grass that suffers. And that's what I see. Hamas on one side, the Israeli government on the other, two elephants rumbling. And who's getting caught are their people on all sides, are innocents. And that's painful to see and to watch.
How difficult is the discussion of the war in Brazil, Yoji? Is there much discussion?
Well, this year is very interesting, the discussion, because at first the mainstream media was very pro-Israel, and because there is some of those people who died in the Israeli part are Brazilian, some of those kidnapped are Brazilians. But then it started the drama, because there were also several Brazilian Palestinians trapped in Gaza, and was in certain way very reassuring. All what the Brazilian government, the present government, Lula's presidency, did to rescue those peoples. You know, at first Brazil was the president of the Security Council during the last month, and they tried many times to do resolution where the United States blocked.
We got to stop it right
And
there,
then
Yoji. We're out of time. Listen, thank you for the comment, but we'll come back to this conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time. Thank you.